Our guest this time is Taryn Williams. She's an award-winning CEO and founder working at the intersection of talent, media, and technology. At just 21, Taryn started Wink Models, which has grown to become a leading modelling agency. She's also built and exited a number of companies and holds several board roles. On top of that, Taryn's recently completed the AICD's Company Directors course too. Taryn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we mentioned a moment ago that you started your very first business, Wink Models, at just 21 years old. What made you do that? What inspired you to make that leap from modeling to having your own business?
Insanity. No, blissful naivety of youth. I think a little bit of both, probably. I guess I didn't know at that age that it really was something unconventional to go and start your own business. I'd worked around a number of freelance people, obviously freelance creators, photographers. That whole industry is quite sort of flexible. And because I hadn't had a traditional career, I didn't have a traditional job to go and leave. So it wasn't like I had to make this big sort of decision to go and quit my job and go and start something on my own. And I just sort of saw all of these inefficiencies and inequalities in the industry and how it was operating. So predominantly, I think the biggest pain point for me was that it took sort of 60, 90 days to get paid as a model, which to me just didn't make sense. I was like, this doesn't happen in any other industry. But the logic was that the agency had to wait for the client to pay them, and the advertising agency then had to pay the talent agency or the modeling agency. And I was like, well, your cash flow is not really my issue. I'm the end receiver talent. You should have enough cash flow to be able to pay your talent, within 14 days or 30 days at the worst, like any other business. So I thought, I'm going to start my own agency. I'm going to pay everyone in 7 days, and I'm going to treat them with decency and respect and build like a really family type atmosphere, and sort of grew from there.
You've now started a number of businesses. You've built and exited many of these companies. What do you think are some of the most significant lessons you've learned from, say, scaling and then selling these companies?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think probably most of my career has sort of developed from trying to stay aware of what was happening in the broader ecosystem and trying to have a macro level of industry changes. So my next business was a two-sided marketplace for creative talent, a tech business. And I'd built an end-to-end onboarding, calendar management, and payroll integration software for Wink, the modeling agency. And so I could see that there was this shift towards fast turnaround digital content. I could see that there was the advent of other marketplaces like Airtasker and Freelancer had just launched. And so I could see that there was a shift coming, and I wanted to be at the sort of forefront of it. So I think a lot of my career has sort of stemmed from trying to stay on top and adapt, to how the broader industry was changing. And then I think probably the success in scaling and selling and exiting was around sort of really trying to be aware of needing to have great people around me, whether that was mentors, advisors, board members, making sure that, I don't think it can be a single solo person race at any one point in time. You need to be able to build great teams, great advisory boards, and understanding when the right time is to step out of one venture and into another.
This is something that I'm sure many founders struggling with. You've built this company. It's your baby.
Yeah.
You've put in your own blood, sweat, and tears and money.
Yeah.
How do you know it's the right time to bring in other people, whether it's advisors, investors, or board members?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It can be really difficult, especially bringing in a formal CEO. I think a lot of founders struggle with the idea of, maybe not being the person in charge and making all the day-to-day decisions. But I think for me, it was a combination of things. It was recognizing the point the business was at. So, for example, there was a very, very clear point with the Right Fit, the two-sided marketplace that I built, where raising capital made a lot of sense for us because we needed to build a defensible moat. We have product market fit, and we needed to scale really, really quickly. And so to do that, I needed to obviously build a bigger team. I needed to bring in external capital, and I needed to build a formal board of advisors because I was not a technical founder. I had very deep domain expertise, but I didn't have technical expertise or marketplace expertise. So it was very clear when I did that cap raise, the kind of people that I wanted around the table on our board. So I think it can be difficult to identify when the exact right point is to either raise capital. I think bringing in external team members should always be as soon as you become the bottleneck in the organization and you're blocking growth because you want to be across every single detail or hire or decision, I think it's probably time to bring in broader team members. But I think recognizing the right time to exit can be really challenging because you're right. It is, something that you become so attached to, your own baby, and thinking about it going and, living a life outside of you and after you can be really challenging.
It must be quite emotional sometimes saying goodbye to that company,
Yes.
that thing you've built.
Yeah. When I sold The Right Fit, I took all of our team so we had offices in Singapore, in Sydney, Melbourne, and we had people working internationally as well. So both in the US and in the Philippines and in India. And I brought all of the team together in Bali to say goodbye. And it was I didn't realize it at the time because I think, you'd been head down in 6 months of DD and, getting through the process of selling a business. And it really hit me having them all there and seeing people face to face and having all of these one-on-one conversations with some people had been with me for, 4, 5, 6 years through a lot of the journey of growing and scaling that business. And yeah, it was incredibly emotional, sort of saying goodbye and accepting that it was going to go on and have a new life. So
let's talk a bit more about your career. You've had these roles as a founder, as a chief executive, but you've also taken on a number of director and advisory positions. What drew you to those sorts of board roles, and how has it evolved alongside your other work?
yeah, it was. So my first board role was just a tap on the shoulder. We're an organization that think you could add a lot of value. Would you be interested in joining? And to be honest, I probably hadn't thought a lot about it until that point. And I was at a point in my career where I had enough time and flexibility to be able to join an external board. But I really sat down and thought about it at that point and thought, like, is this something that I want to do, that I have the skills to do, that I have the interest in developing that sort of area of my career? So I went and saw a lot of my mentors actually and had a lot of conversations about, I think it's obviously a very, very different role to being a founder, an entrepreneur and CEO, which was sort of my career path to that date. So, and I, made the decision to join a board as one board to start with. And I really loved it. It exposes you to so many different things outside of your own, skill set and wheelhouse. And being around these incredible other board members who I was just learning so much from, and I guess having quite a different skill set and background and domain expertise, really feeling like I could add value to an organization that wasn't my own was something that I really, I guess, derived a lot of satisfaction from in seeing that being applied to a company that wasn't my own for a change. So I really enjoyed the process. And so after that, I was much more mindful and sat down and thought about, okay, how do I want to build a portfolio career of things that both I derive a lot of satisfaction from, that I feel like I'm giving back in sort of a non-for-profit, my board roles in that sense, and then still being abreast of the next generation of companies that are coming through. So sitting on boards for tech startups and AI companies, so that I get to keep, my finger on the pulse.
This is something we talk to a lot of people about, balancing founder roles or executive roles with board positions. Like you said, they are very, very different
Completely
jobs.
opposite ends of the spectrum.
How do you balance that? How do you approach the two different mindsets?
It's such a mindset shift. That's the best way to describe it is, I think, especially if you've been, as I have only ever been a founder and CEO of my own companies, in that role, you are, pivoting quickly, you're making decisions, you're hands-on, you are so in the detail and granularity, and you are probably the person that knows the most about your company at any one point in time. And then switching and putting your hat on as a board member, and the completely different skill set required and completely different mindset required of being able to step back, have that 30,000 foot view, being able to look at the sort of broader industry trends and being able to just interrogate ideas coming from founders, coming from management and C-suite. It's a completely different skill set. So it did take a while, I think, to adapt and change. And really, probably for the first year of sitting in board meetings, I would really have to come very, very prepared in thinking about, okay, you're not here to solve the problem. It's not your job to come up with a tactical executional role. You're here to support the management, to challenge management. And really, I think, stepping out of the granularity and the weeds, I think was probably the biggest challenge for me. So it definitely takes time. And I absolutely love it now because it does work a completely different part of your brain.
We talked earlier about some of the companies that you've built, and you've clearly got an eye for opportunities, an eye for disruption.
Yeah.
How do you do that? When you're looking for an industry, a sector, a marketplace to innovate, what are you looking for? And
Mm.
also, I guess, what are the lessons for boards out of that?
Yeah. I think for me, it was really, I've always been a very curious person. I've always loved learning. I've always loved challenging myself. Like, I got my pilot's license when I was 15 before I could drive a car. Just really silly things like that, where I think it was a very conscious choice to really always be looking at the landscape and going, what else could I be doing? What else could I be learning? And I think that that's, trickled through in my commercial career as well. So probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, I really started thinking and looking at AI and learning about AI and getting to the weeds of AI, because I could just start to see there was trends happening and I wanted to be on top of that and I wanted to be abreast of that. So I think probably the biggest takeaway is just always being curious, always considering yourself in permanent beta as well. Like, I still do so much continuing education right now to this day, and I always think there's more I can learn. There's definitely things that I could be more across. And so I think having that curiosity and always wanting to continue developing as a board member is really important, because I mean, especially in this day and age, like, so many industries are ripe for disruption, and it's going to be, quite terrifying, I think, for a number of organizations as to how they navigate this next sort of 2, 3, 4 year chapter.
You've now been on both sides of that founder and board member relationship. We might have a listener out there who has their own company, they're a founder. When is the right time to bring on those board members? And do you have any advice for founders on how to start working with advisory groups or board members?
So I probably had been doing it informally. If I look back on it now, I had probably always had a really core group of mentors around me who I would see informally for one-on-one coffees or catch-ups to really workshop particular ideas or problems or challenges or growth stages of the organization. So I had probably been doing that informally and not really thought about formalizing it until we raised our first round of capital. And then obviously that came with needing to build a formal board. My advice to founders would be do it way earlier than you think you need to. And I found that it just put so much robustness around us as an organization, and it added so much support. I mean, a great board shouldn't slow you down. I think I went through a period of thinking, my God, I'm spending a day a month on reporting, and, it's super arduous and time consuming, and that's time that's taking me away from executing. But it actually put these, belts and braces around the organization and gave us this rigor and focus, and made us actually stop and reflect on what had succeeded. The challenge of articulating what you've done over the last sort of 30-day period, what went well, what didn't, and why, to someone who is not in the granularity of the day-to-day, I found so beneficial. So I would definitely recommend, if you don't have a formal board, definitely like an advisory board is really, really beneficial. And I think just in our case, opened so many doors. It really connected me to different people that I probably wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to, and just gave me a much better 360 view of the company and where our strengths and weaknesses were.
That's the relationship from the founder side. What
Yeah.
about from the board member side? How can directors really help not just the founder, but also help the whole organization, the whole company grow? What should they be doing?
Yeah. So I think firstly, make sure you deeply understand the organization. So I think it can be very common for board members to join an organization and not really have a deep understanding of the underlying business or, the industry that it trades in. And so I think it's really important to understand that and deeply understand the drivers of the business, and write down, if you can, to the unit economics, all the underlying levers that are going to create success or failure in that organization. And then I think really thinking strategically about how you can add value. And it can be really simple things down to opening doors, introductions, spending one-on-one time with the founder or CEO and making sure that you understand the strategy and how, there's obviously you would have been brought onto that board for a particular reason. Understanding what that reason was and how you can add the most support and value, I think, is really important. And continue to interrogate that over time, because obviously the needs of the organization are going to change over time and your role within that will change. So I think making sure you sort of stay on top of the industry and stay on top of the needs of the executive team is really important.
Taryn, I wanted to drill down on some of the sectors or fields you've been involved with. A lot of your projects or companies have been focused around creatives, influencers, branding, reputation. some listeners, some directors might not be overly familiar with those areas. But can you tell us why branding and why reputation is so important um, for organizations, for boards, and I guess especially in this digital first world we live in?
Yeah. And I think too often it's been sort of seen as like marketing's problem. That's sort of not a board responsibility. But I think in this day and age, especially with, such an overused word, but authenticity, I think consumers now have a direct channel to be able to share their frustrations with a board, with a brand, with an organization. And that's really important. So being able to control that narrative and understand the impact on the value of the company, the success or failure of being able to attract good talent, like it really touches so many elements of and areas that fall into a board's responsibility. So I think having an understanding of how the day-to-day operations of an organization impact broader brand value is really important, and having ways to measure and understand that. So, whether that's through net promoter scores, whether that's through monitoring social media feedback, all of those things are really important for a brand to have, for a board to have visibility to and understand. And also understanding that they're not this sort of, I think, intangible thing that you can never really understand or grasp or value. They really do, have deep value, both at a sort of esoteric level, but at a financial level.
I wanted to pick up on a couple things you said. You mentioned the importance of authenticity. Earlier, we also talked a little bit about AI.
Mm,
So, how
right.
is artificial intelligence going to disrupt some of those areas, brand and reputation?
Yeah.
And what does AI mean for authenticity?
It's incredibly, incredibly challenging. And I think it's going to be a really terrifying time. And I mean, I think generative AI and AI more broadly, but generative AI in particular is so exciting in terms of, from a brand perspective, you can make a plethora of content that is customized right down to an individual. You can do different languages and geographies in a much easier way than ever before, which is really exciting. It allows us to communicate better, tick. But it also has a lot of downside risk in terms of exactly those authenticity pieces, fraudulent content, and consumers just not knowing what to trust anymore, I think is going to be the hardest thing, especially on social media channels where you're already starting to see it. And I'm sure everyone has had videos or clips shared by a friend saying, wow, look at this thing. And you're like, that's made with AI. It's not real content. And so I think the lens of a consumer and critical thinking, I think, is going to be a really difficult chasm for brands to be able to step over now and go, okay, we utilize these tools in a way that allow us to do certain things that are going to add value. And we have to be very, very careful not to destroy trust with a customer and a consumer, because I think that's going to be very, very challenging over the next sort of 12, 24 months until there's probably regulation around. Obviously, you see it on social media now. You're supposed to flag mark things with AI. Whether or not that happens is another case. But I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation and narrative, and definitely something that should be coming to a board level. And do we have an AI strategy? How do we think about building trust with consumers? How do we ensure that we're not destroying brand with a big B through the use of these tools and new channels? Because I think it's going to be an incredibly challenging time.
One of the areas with this that a lot of boards are struggling with is you want to have guardrails in place. You want to make sure that AI is not running amok and you've got the right
Yep.
structures, processes, governance. But at the same time, you don't want to stifle
Yeah.
innovation and miss out on opportunities.
Yeah.
So, how do you balance that as a founder, as an executive, and as a board member? How do
Yeah.
you balance that opportunity, but also the risks and the guardrails?
It's incredibly hard because I think not only are you having to look at what does this mean for my organization? How can we successfully utilize some of these things to increase our speed to market, drive growth, all of the, great things for an organization versus, where are the guardrails and boundaries and where can it cause risk for us? But then on top of that, most companies are using publicly available tools and you don't know how these tools are trained, what they're built on, what inherent biases they have. So as much as you can try and put guardrails or braces around your own organization and say, well, we're only going to use it for these things, or you actually don't know how the underlying models are trained, and that's really, really scary. So I think how I've been trying to look at it as both an executive and as a board member are what are ways that we can safely utilize AI in internal processes in a way that we can really clearly extract value and free our people up to go and spend time doing things that are more of a value add, versus handing over control of creative processes, of content, over all sorts of things to AI, where we don't yet have a really clear understanding of maybe the second order impact of those decisions. So I think it's something that only one of the boards that I'm on has a very clear AI strategy at the moment. And I think the rest are really still grappling with what it's going to look like long term, how much money they should invest. There's no clear, guardrails on that either, in terms of should it be a percentage of total revenue? Should we be starting with particular elements of the business? Like, do we look at operations first? Do we look at marketing first? Do we, or obviously the preferable approach is to try and break down those silos, build an amazing data warehouse and, really think about it strategically. Unfortunately, it's very hard to do in existing businesses. And as we all know, big ships are harder to turn than ever. So I think it's going to be a challenge that I don't have the single-handed answer to, but I think the most important thing for any board member is just staying abreast of what the opportunities are out there and getting your hands dirty, playing with some of these tools so you can come and ask sort of informed questions and interrogating the sort of direction that the organization's taking around AI.
How are you using AI yourself, either as an executive or a board member?
Yeah, so I probably use maybe 15 or 20 AI tools on a daily basis across all different sorts of things, from deep research to really basic things like using ChatGPT to proof things before they go out, or as a co-pilot, in interrogating my decision making, or as I'm thinking through things, AI note takers. There's so many basic things that have just solved a multitude of frustrating pain points. I've been in a deep dark hole of exploring Gen AI tools, so making a digital twin of myself that I could then train to make AI generated content, utilizing it to edit marketing content into, splice down multiple different versions of something that would have taken an editor, 3, 4, 5 days to do, can now be done in seconds, localizing content. So it's been a really interesting period of just trying to stay abreast of trends, seeing how good things actually are and where they could add value, and then thinking strategically across my own companies. At what point will we start to transition people away from maybe doing some of these tasks to purely utilizing AI for those tasks? And I don't think we're quite there yet.
Staying abreast of those trends, like you said, is going to be a core skill for directors going forward, as is AI literacy, knowing how to use these tools. What are some other skills you think directors and boards are going to need going into the future?
Such a great question. I mean, I personally think boards will start looking for deeper domain expertise in particular areas as opposed to generalists, because I do think you will see the advent of very clear, you'll need to be a deep domain expert in cyber, for example, and every board will need that kind of skill set. You might need someone, ideally you should have someone who's a really deep domain expert in brand and marketing. And I think that's often a skill set that maybe gets missed at a board level. Always, great representation from sort of legal and financial, but maybe not brand. So I think definitely having a strong understanding of sort of generalist things. Like, I think AI will become something that isn't a base expectation and everyone should be a generalist in. I probably think EQ will rise to the top in being something that is more important as we go through this generation of and next iteration of change, because I think that's going to be probably the one skill set that for now can't be replaced with AI. So I think thinking about the thinking, I think will be really important as well, having a strategic ability to interrogate where the next opportunities are. Not just, I think boards have historically been very good at identifying risk and looking at risk, and maybe not as focused on opportunity. So I think having a skill set around being able to identify opportunity, not just risk, will be important.
We were talking about the boards of the future. What about the directors of the future? That I'm sure they're going to have many of those skills that you just talked about. But what advice would you have for aspiring directors? How should they be positioning themselves?
Yeah. Look, I definitely think pursuing a really clear, deep domain expertise in a particular area, I think is key. So I think identifying what that might be for you. I think all of the basic ones still stand, like having a really strong, robust understanding of how to run a P&L, the financial drivers of business, especially if you have, fortunately or unfortunately, I've always had to do that in my company as being a founder and entrepreneur, but most people don't have to run a P&L in their organization. So, having that financial literacy, being able to run a P&L and understanding the financial drivers in an organization, I think is really critically important. So if you don't have that skill set, absolutely going and upskilling yourself on that. And then I think understanding, where your domain expertise lies and doubling down on that and really being able to showcase, here's how I've driven value in this particular area, or here's how I could, really add that skill set at a board level. And then I think, having a really good understanding of where the next opportunities and risks are. So I think at the moment it's definitely AI, but also geopolitical instabilities. And I think understanding the broader ecosystem that we as businesses are going to have to exist in the next 3 to 5 years and how that will change as the geopolitical landscape changes, I think is very important too.
We don't have too much time left, but I did want to talk a little bit about diversity. You've been a strong advocate for women in leadership. The tech sector, look, like a lot of industries, has a mixed record when it comes to gender balance and women in leadership. But what change have you seen in the tech sector while you've been working there?
I mean, I think back to The Right Fit would have been probably nearly 10 years ago that I started building my first tech company. And there was so many times where I was the only woman in a room. There was no other female founders. There was no other females who had raised capital in that fund. So it was an incredibly challenging time. And now it's definitely improved. And I think we've seen dedicated funds to help female founders raise capital, dedicated programs to help females in STEM, which is fantastic. We certainly haven't solved the problem. And, I think I haven't seen any nation globally who has managed to solve the problem of solving representation in any field yet. I do think it's pleasing to see the numbers of women enrolling in STEM subjects, which is because a big part of the problem is a pipeline problem. So I think, and also now that we see this next generation of female founders coming out the other side, Mel from Canva, fantastic female founders who have gone on, and we've got these success stories that we can celebrate and show that there's a pathway to this being a viable career. So I think we're making steps in the right direction. We certainly don't have it solved. And I think, government policy has a lot to play in this field as well. And I certainly think we need to have a cold, hard look at some of the decisions we're making and how we, more broadly, how we celebrate entrepreneurship in Australia and how we back and fund entrepreneurship, because the last thing we want is more brain drain and people leaving and going to places where it is easier and more financially viable for founders to build great companies.
I want to talk more about brain drain and lessons from overseas in a moment, but just sticking a little bit with diversity, you talked earlier about the importance of mentors.
Yes.
How have mentors helped you and helped shape you in your career?
I've been so fortunate to have incredible mentors, and they came really organically. I probably didn't realize it at the time, but I was very good at putting my hand up and asking for help. And so I would proactively reach out to people, cold reach out on LinkedIn or someone who I'd met once at an event, and I'd say, I need to build a payment gateway and I've narrowed it down to these particular providers and I've done this cost benefit. Can I please have half an hour of your time to go through this, ask you some questions? And those would often develop into formal mentor relationships where, I would meet with them monthly. 2 ended up joining my board. 1 ended up becoming an investor, So it was probably about putting my hand up, asking for help. And I reflect on people that I've mentored over the years and what makes a good mentee versus a great mentee. And I think people who come back and say, I've done the 8 things that you asked me to do. I haven't been able to do 9 and 10. I'm blocked on this particular area. Can I now have another half an hour of your time? Here's where I've got to. Here's the growth results. This is what I've done, X, Y, and Z. And who have come in with structured problems or questions to solve, I think separates the sort of good from the great, as opposed to, can I just pick your brain? I've got some, what should I do with my career? Makes it very, very hard for someone to actually really add a lot of value. But I think having mentors is so important. I think mine would hold me to account personally and professionally. I would frequently hear from them, like, I can see this repeat behavior pattern happening here. Dig into that. What's going on here? This is career limiting for you, or this is going to stop you from achieving the things that you want to achieve. And, just having people with that who are much further along the journey than you, who can add that value and completely different perspective. Really, really important.
Jumping back a bit, before we were talking about mentors, you were talking about the tech scene, I guess, overseas and other markets. At the time of recording, you're about to go overseas and you've got some business meetings in the Middle East coming up. You've worked around the world now. Are there other markets, other nations that approach, I guess, innovation and technology in a different way to Australia? And what can we learn from those other nations, other jurisdictions?
Yeah, look, I think the US is a fantastic example. They just have such a different mindset approach to failure. And, that it's most great entrepreneurs there have had multiple failures. They've won it all, they've lost it all, they've won it all again. And that is a part of the journey, and there's no shame in that. And I think in Australia, we have, unfortunately, a bit of a tall poppy syndrome. And then we also really see failure as something that should be shameful, that, is not acceptable. And I think it limits the number of people who are really willing to take big risks. And unfortunately, that's what you need to build really innovative, different companies. So we really need to change that culture. So I think the US does it really well. Obviously, they've got more capital to deploy. It's a bigger market. It's easier to win there in terms of you've got a bigger population to sell products to. So I also look at countries like, I'm very interested by the Middle East at the moment, but Israel has a fantastic innovation culture. And, obviously that has been required because of their geographic positioning in the world and having to defend themselves. But their government also matches nearly dollar for dollar investment spend in R&D. So they have huge investment in R&D programs. So, things like that we could easily apply here and really make sure that we're fostering great innovation and research and development, because a lot, especially as you go into some of these more complex AI companies for sure, but, med tech, fintech, a lot of these things can take a lot of time to show value. And I think if we want to encourage people to tackle complex long-term problems, quantum, then I think you have to accept that there's going to require government investment and government funding to get those started. The US did an amazing job of that, funding the internet, things like that. So I think we really need to think as a nation, where do we want to be and what do we want to be known for in the world? You see countries like a lot of the nations in the Middle East making very strategic decisions to step away from being just petroleum countries and investing very heavily in R&D, in AI, and those things are really important. I think they've got a very strategic national agenda, and I think we need to have the same and not be over-reliant on natural resources.
So it's no one thing, it's culture and policy and funding all together.
Very well articulated.
Looking back at your career, your executive roles, founder roles, and now your board career, is there one big insight that you wish you'd known back at the start?
Gosh. Really good question. I think probably that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into just one particular thing. I think that probably the first 10 years of my career, I was obviously very focused on growing my first business. And I thought it needed to come at the cost of other things that I was very interested in. I studied politics and international relations at university, and I sort of really parked that part of myself or my brain or my career to really double down on building a business that was very much focused on sort of media, creative talent. So I think probably if I reflect, I would have liked to have had a broader first sort of 10, 15 years of my career that allowed me to explore all of those different angles of myself and my personality. But, I think rightly or wrongly, it got me to where I am today and has afforded me the opportunity to come up for air and go, okay, what am I interested in, and what kind of businesses do I want to build next, and what boards do I want to sit on that allow me that opportunity now.
One final question. This is an AICD podcast, so I have to ask you about the Company Directors course, the CDC.
Yes.
You recently completed the course.
I did.
What made you want to do it, and what were the major takeaways? Yeah,
so I have, if I'm honest, been putting it off doing it for probably 5 or 6 years because never feels like there's the right time. And I'd exited another company nearly 18 months ago. I was supposed to be on sabbatical. So really I had actually no good excuse as to why I couldn't carve out 5 days of my life and do it. And so I enrolled and I thought, okay, look, it's 5 days. It's going to be super dry. You just need to get through it. Tick the box was the mindset I'd gone in with. And I just loved it so much. Like I have told so many people, it was such a richer experience than I expected it to be. I just sort of thought that it was going to be very dry and, a lot of sort of governance and risk and sort of dry material, but it was delivered in such a fantastic way. And all of the hosts had such great personal stories to share about challenges they'd been through as directors, challenges they'd been through as CEOs, and really helped, I think, facilitate great conversation and discussion, within the cohort. So I met so many interesting people from really wildly different walks of life, from defense, from completely different walks of life that I probably wouldn't have crossed paths with. And I think it made the experience firstly, so much more interesting, but secondly, so much more reflective of what being on a board is like. And having those differences of opinions, difference of learnings, of backgrounds, to have really robust conversations. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would highly recommend anyone go and do it. Even if you've been, my background, coming from a non sort of traditional pathway to this course, I would highly recommend it.
Taryn, thanks for such a strong endorsement of the CDC.
My pleasure.
And thanks very much for doing the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.